Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today I'm going to be reviewing the newest album from Anderson Paak, Ventura. Now Anderson Paak is a figure that I've heard a lot of great things about in recent years. However, I didn't get around to actually checking out his music until fairly recently, in the weeks leading up to the release of this new album of his. If you didn't notice, I didn't review his last album that came out last year just because, well, I was interested in checking it out. It just never ended up happening, unfortunately. I still have not listened to that last album of his yet. I have listened to his album Malibu just because I heard that was his best record. Overall, I do think it's a really good project overall, and because I liked that album as much as I did, I was pretty excited to hear this new project that has just been released. So throughout this review, I can't really make any comparisons to his last project. I can only really take a look at this album and examine it as its own thing, but I have plenty of things to say in that regard, so I don't really think it's that important that I haven't heard his last record. Overall, I think this album is a pretty good record. There's a lot to really enjoy here on this thing. I do think it just falls the slightest bit short of being a great album, but it still is a really good project, and it's one that is really worth checking out and listening to if you haven't done so already. The start to this album is one that's pretty strong in my opinion. The opening track to this thing, Come Home, that features Andre 3000, is probably one of the strongest cuts on this project, and overall is just a great opener to this thing. I was a little concerned that Andre 3000's feature was going to maybe, outshine Anderson Paak on his own track, and I thought that wouldn't be much of a good thing, especially as the album opener. However, that's not the case here on this song, as while Andre 3000's verse on this thing is really great, really standout, overall just a fantastic performance on his part, Anderson Paak holds his own on this track as well, bringing some fantastic vocals to this track, some really electrifying performances, and the production here on this track is pretty nice as well. Overall, it's a great opener to this album and one that definitely grabs my attention and gets me excited to hear the rest of this project. The second track on this album is another great song, Make It Better, featuring Smokey Robinson. Overall, just a great song in my opinion. Once again, Anderson Paak's vocal performance on this track is pretty outstanding. He does a really great job here at conveying a lot of the emotions here in this track. Lyrically, the song deals with the narrator trying to, I guess, fix this relationship that they're in with another person, kind of trying to reignite the passion in it, I guess you could say. And Anderson Paak here, joined with Smokey Robinson, do a great job at really conveying the all the emotions that go along here on this song. Overall, the song has a kind of sweet tone to it that I think works really nice. I'm not quite sure I would say the track is upbeat necessarily, but it is one of the sweeter moments on this thing overall, and another one of the highlights. And then in the back half of this album, really from King James onward, I think this album also has a really solid collection of tracks that it throws at you one after another. Some of the highlights in here include the closing track to this thing, What Can We Do, which features vocals from the late Nate Dogg. Overall, I think his vocals that are mixed here onto this track work really nicely with Anderson Paak's vocals, which is something I wasn't necessarily anticipating given the fact that, like I said, Nate Dogg's vocals here are sampled following his death. He wasn't, of course, recording with Anderson Paak, so I was kind of surprised by the amount of chemistry that they have here together on this song. The hook to this closing track is also pretty catchy as well, and overall it's just a really solid way to end this project. I really like how this album has a really strong opening track and a closing track. It gives you a good impression at the start, and it leaves you with a pretty good impression at the end as well. The track Jet Black featuring Brandy is another one of my favorite songs here on this project that appears in the later half of this album. I really love the chemistry between everyone doing the vocals here on the song. I really love the smooth, silky, kind of sensual beat that goes along with this track, and the very sensual vocal performances that just pair up with it excellently. Overall, it's one of those tracks that I just keep coming back to from this album, even when I'm not listening to the album as a whole. Definitely one of the highlights on here from this thing. While I've praised a lot of Anderson Paak's performances across some of my favorite songs on the album that I've already mentioned, I'd have to say that across the thing as a whole, a lot of his vocal performances are just great all around. Even on some of the weaker cuts on this thing that I'll get into a bit later on, his vocal performances are still pretty strong, and it definitely at least keeps every song on this album feeling, somewhat enjoyable. I also really like the fact that this album is pretty short and to the point at around only 40 minutes or so in length. This thing doesn't really waste your time or anything like that, even with some weaker tracks mixed in there that I'll get to in a moment. this project is still pretty breezy in a good way. Especially when paired up with the more summer-like vibe that this album has going for it, the more laid-back feel. I think that the shorter length works to the album's other qualities in a really nice way. So while I enjoy the good majority of this project, there are some cuts on this thing that I just don't find to be as entertaining as others, particularly starting around track 3 and leading up all the way to King James, but not including that track because I do like that track quite a bit. That stretcher of 4 tracks or so just aren't as interesting to me overall. I mean, the third track on the album, Reaching Too Much, is one that has grown on me with repeated listens. I will say that overall I think it's a pretty decent track, and there's a lot to enjoy on the song. I do think it is a little bit longer than it needs to be, though, still. But the other 3 tracks that follow it are just kind of uninteresting to me at the very least. I mean, I think Anderson Paak's vocal performance on these songs are pretty great overall, like I said before. However, outside of this, there's not much to these tracks that I was really enamored with. The production was just fine. I mean, it wasn't bad, but it wasn't really great either. The lyrics were, once again, nothing really all that special either. They were just okay songs that I wouldn't be against listening to again in the future necessarily, but not songs I'm ever going to really seek out to listen to again in the future either. They were just fine tracks overall. And while the majority of the tracks on this album are songs that I like, I am kind of disappointed by the fact that all the tracks I don't really care for all that much are bunched up together in one part of the track list, really. Kind of like, once again, I said tracks 3, and then the 4 that follow that. I'm not going to do the math right now. But it's just kind of disappointing that the album wasn't structured in a way that maybe kept the listening experience a bit more consistently exciting, because I feel like the album's start and end are definitely the highlights, while the middle is just not as interesting. But even despite this kind of weak portion of the track listing that I didn't really care for all that much, Ventura is still an album that offers a whole lot to enjoy. Like I said, there's a lot of great cuts on this thing, some pretty great features, great production, great vocal performances, just a lot on here that I think is overall very much worth checking out if you're a fan of Anderson Paak, or if you're just into this kind of style of hip-hop, R&B mixture. You'll like this project to some extent if you're a fan of that style of music. Would I say it's better than an album like Malibu, which, like I said, I can't compare this to any of his other releases really, but at least when compared to Malibu, I'd still say that album is probably better overall. But this one, still pretty good. Lots of great cuts on this thing. Definitely worth listening to and checking out. But yeah, that's just my own personal opinion. If you happen to disagree, either you liked it more than I did or disliked it more than I did, it's perfectly fine. In fact, feel free to leave your own opinion in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, make sure you leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more music-related content. Things like album reviews, track reviews, things of that sort. If you like that kind of content, make sure you subscribe. Thank you for watching once again, and stay golden.